The seeds of Apple, ironically, were sown on an April Fool's Day. On April 1st, in 1976, on a bright sunny day, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne founded Apple in a garage which now has more money than the US government. To put that into perspective, Apple's market capitalization is larger than all the countries except for US, China, Japan, and Germany. So, if Apple would have been a country, then it would have been wealthier than almost every country on planet Earth, including major powers like the United Kingdom, India, and France. At the end of this video, I will share with you 10 of the most unbelievable and fascinating facts you didn't know about Apple. Well, I can bet on that. So sit back, relax, and let's get the ball rolling. One last thing. If you like business, entrepreneurship, and especially stories, then consider subscribing to our channel Alphause. Because you'll miss the best brand and business stories out there. With just one click, you get the most startling stories instantly, and that too, free. So don't forget to smash that bell icon so you get notified when an incredible story is out for you. Let's get back to the crux now. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak first met in 1971 through a mutual friend of theirs, and they instantly got along, considering the common and shared interest in technology. Both the Steves attended the Homebrew Computer Club, a hobbyist group for computers in California, United States. Eventually, Steve Wozniak created the first prototype computer with a keyboard similar to a typewriter, which had the ability to connect to a television screen. This prototype later became what we and the world known as Apple I. Fascinated and captivated with this, Steve recognized the brilliance and the opportunity in hand. Steve Jobs immediately sold his Volkswagen microbus, and Steve Wozniak sold his HP calculator to fund the production of Apple I. Ronald Wayne, the third partner in Apple Computers, started his first business earlier, a company which sold slot machines. That company failed. Eventually, he was convinced by Steve Jobs to provide administrative oversight and documentation for the new venture, and in return, have a stake of 10% within Apple Computers. Both the Steves had 45% stake each. Wayne was also responsible to act as a tiebreaker in their decisions. Wayne wrote a partnership agreement, and the three founded Apple Computer on April 1st, 1976. Just 12 days after the foundation of Apple Inc., on April 12, 1976, Wayne sold his stake of 10% at merely $800. In today's date, a 10% stake in Apple would be worth close to $100 billion. That fortune could and would have made him one of the richest people in the entire modern world. By the way, Wayne was responsible for drawing the first iconic logo of Apple, which depicted Isaac Newton under the apple tree. After that, the logo was redesigned with the rainbow apple, asserted by Steve Jobs, which was used for another 22 years. Now, before we let this character out of our story, one more thing which he did was to write the Apple I manual. Okay, now Mr. Wayne is out and Apple is back in business. After a year, in 1977, Apple II was released, which was more of a commercial product with a MOS technology processor. MOS stands for metal oxide semiconductor. This processor has just 1 MHz or the clock speed of a computer and 4 kilobytes of RAM. To put it into perspective, it is enough for around just 8 pages of text. Apple II was also a part of the Trinity 1977, which was mostly acclaimed for the home computer market. 3 years down the line, on May 1980, Apple III was launched. The goal was crystal clear: make a computer for the business environment. Well, not every time you hit the goal, do you? Thousands of Apple III were recalled as they lacked the cooling fan which heated up the system. Steve Jobs wanted the cooling fans as a feature. Well, the tragedy of life doesn't lie in reaching your goal, but the tragedy lies in having no goals to reach. The issues were fixed and Apple came back with a bang. On December 12, 1980, Apple started its initial public offering or IPO, and it instantly became a hit. The IPO created the most number of millionaires in the history of business. The number of millionaires was close to 300. Now, Apple 1, 2, and 3 were text-based machines, very similar to the IBM personal computers. And to revolutionize their computer, Apple needed something more. Something which is more user-friendly and intuitive. And it was in 1983, that's when Lisa was launched. Now, during this time, someone new entered the great Apple story. Steve Jobs reached out to John Sculley, who was the then former VP and president of PepsiCo, and tried hiring him from there. Sculley was recognized as a pioneer in marketing. One reason was his initiative of the famous Pepsi Challenge, which resulted in a surge of market share from the most recognized brand in the world, which is Coca-Cola. Well, on a side note, 94% of the world population is aware of the brand Coca-Cola, which makes it the most recognized brand in the world. If you want to know the story of Coca-Cola, then please comment below, and yes, if you have not subscribed yet, do hit the subscribe button and the bell icon. Now, getting back to the story. Jobs asked Sculley, and I quote, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" And Sculley agreed and became the CEO of Apple. Meanwhile, Lisa became one of the first PC or personal computers with a GUI, an acronym for Graphical User Interface. Lisa was positioned for individual business users with 5 MB hard drives. It had to go a number of changes before shipping at US $9,995. Apple took a huge hit because of the high pricing, insufficient software, and few unreliabilities. As a counter to that, Apple launched a faster and cheaper Macintosh, yet the total number of units which were sold in a span of 2 years were only 10,000.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again.
Well, there is a saying which goes like, great leaders don't set out to be a leader, they set out to make a difference. It's never about the role, but always about the goal. Now, here comes a twist in the plot in the May of 1985. Due to the slump in the market, as well as the power struggle with Apple's board members, and especially John Sculley, Steve Jobs was asked to leave Apple and was shown the door. What a tragedy. Steve Jobs was knocked out of Apple. Meanwhile, under the leadership of Sculley, the sales skyrocketed at Apple from $800 million to $8 billion. But most of the people attributed the success to Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, as Sculley joined the company when those Apple creations were already highly lucrative. Sculley used similar marketing strategies which he used in PepsiCo. Throughout his tenure at Apple in the 1980s and 1990s to mass market Macintosh personal computers. John Sculley's stint in Apple has been definitely controversial, as he eliminated the sales methodology and structure which was built by Steve Jobs, and particularly to mass market and compare with IBM for a very similar target market and prospective buyers. There are also rumors that both Sculley and Steve Jobs clashed with each other over the management styles. On one hand, while Steve Jobs was a radiant leader who focused on future innovation, on the other, Sculley focused on their current product and the bottom line, which is profit, on the balance sheet to impress their stakeholders and board of directors. In the midst of all the drama which unfolded, Steve Jobs walked out with few of his Apple employees and founded another company called Next. Almost close to a decade, in May of 1993, eventually Scully was let go and he stepped down as the CEO of Apple. One of the prime reasons being he opposed licensing the Macintosh software and was also talking to the financial giant Goldman Sachs to split Apple into two different companies. When Scully left in May of 1993, Apple had $2 billion in cash and $200 million in debt. Apple was in jeopardy and needed someone strong as a visionary leader to take the leap and dominate the technology world.
The minute that you understand that you can poke life and actually something will, if you push in, something will pop out the other side, that you can change it, you can mold it. That's maybe the most important thing, is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it, versus embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it. I think that's very important. And however you learn that, once you learn it, you'll want to change life and make it better, because it's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. Most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old. And he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them. You gotta act. And you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to crash and burn. With people on the phone, with starting a company, with whatever. If you're afraid of failing, you won't get very far.
As Rachel Griffiths says, there's nothing as exciting as a comeback. Seeing someone with dreams, watching them fail, and then getting a second chance. Yes, Steve Jobs was back, and he was back with a bang. Apple went ahead and bought Steve Jobs' company Next, which not only meant Steve was back in the management team as a CEO, yet also the technology which was used in Next would become the stepping stone and the foundational ground for Mac operating system. After a critical restructuring of the management and teams within Apple during the Mac World Expo in 1997, Steve Jobs declared that they were going to shake hands with Bill Gates and partner with Microsoft to have Macintosh as well as a fund of $150 million. Why did Bill Gates give $150 million to Steve Jobs at Apple? Another interesting and astonishing story, which we will cover in an upcoming video, so do consider subscribing to Alphause. Now, post this, in 1998, Steve Jobs along with the team in Apple developed and grew the iMac, a family of all-in-one Macintosh desktop computers. It was the same year when the first iMac was released, and Apple did take a hit as people preferred Intel Windows PCs, yet Apple went ahead and came up with a series of updated models, and most importantly, they diversified their business. Post the millennium, the iPod launched in the first year, that is 2001. Steve Jobs was a genius in marketing. When other companies talked about the features and benefits of the product, Steve kept things which described exactly where anyone can understand the value proposition of what Apple has to offer. 1,000 songs in your pocket was how the iPod was marketed, and it became a huge hit. In 2004, Apple came up with the iTunes Music Store, which had more than a couple of millions of downloads in the first 2 weeks of launch. Apple grew under the radiant leadership of the visionary Steve Jobs. Then, in the summer of 2007, came the famous launch and presentation of the iPhone. It became an instant hit. Though there were existing players in the mobile market, yet Apple left the competition and surged to new heights, leaving the competition behind with leaps and bounds. Apple also launched its flagship MacBook Air in the year 2008, which had a tremendous and biggest changes in Apple's laptop line of business, as well as a new category of computers called Ultrabooks. Apple became a household name and the brand value fostered when suddenly, in 2011, Steve Jobs died at the age of 56 years due to pancreatic cancer. The world lost a visionary leader, and Steve Jobs, the billionaire, left a void in the world where he put a dent in. Here are his last words on the sickbed. I reached the pinnacle of success in the business world. In others' eyes, my life is an epitome of success. However, aside from work, I have little joy. In the end, wealth is only a fact of life that I am accustomed to. At this moment, lying on the sickbed and recalling my whole life, I realized that all the recognition and wealth that I took so much pride in have paled and became meaningless in the face of impending death. Apple lost Steve Jobs. Apple continued the march and acquired Beats, a headphone manufacturer, and ran a music service for $3 billion in 2014. Apple also introduced Apple Watches, and till date it has released 13 generations of iPhone along with different versions of iPad and iMac. Today, iPhone is one of the most widely used smartphones on planet Earth, and also Apple is still one of the world's most iconic, visionary and valuable brand. Here is a quick snap of how Apple is performing today and how profitable they are. As promised earlier on this video, here are 10 most interesting facts about the company Apple which not everyone knows. The first computer of Apple was sold at $666.66. Apple's first logo was of Isaac Newton. Apple also launched a clothing line in 1986. Apple devices are always set to 941 in any kind of advertisement. Apple's rival Samsung manufactures the iPad Retina display. Apple's market capitalization is larger than all countries except for US, China, Japan, and Germany. Tony Fadell, who was the creator of iPod, took his idea to Philips, who turned it down. Apple recognized the potential and hired him to lead a team of 30 people, and the rest is history. Apple's iPod revolutionized the way people listen to music on personal devices. A MacBook Pro can stop a .22 caliber bullet and a 9mm handgun in its tracks. Apple sold 849,450 iPhones per day in 2018 and earned $691,234 per minute in the first quarter of 2021. China is currently Apple's second biggest market. Well, let me throw a bonus for you all. It is easier to get into Harvard University than getting a job at the Apple Store. Now, if you have used any of Apple's products, then do comment on this video and tell us which one was your oldest Apple gadget and why did you choose Apple over anything else. Again, if you are an entrepreneur, solopreneur, content creator, business student, small business or a medium business, or anyone who likes brand and stories, then do consider subscribing to Alphause and boop the like button so that the video reaches to a wider audience and they also know the Apple story, which is revolutionary, radical and remarkable. Until next time, signing off. Till then, go ahead and change the world, because as Steve Jobs rightly said, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who actually do. Peace out.